What happens if my period falls on the day of my main race? Should I change my training when I'm menstruating? Is it best just to take a complete rest if I've got stomach cramps? There are so many questions around training and racing and a woman's monthly cycle. So today I plan to share the advice for all those various scenarios and situations. Plus, we're going to be hearing from a pro triathlete and how she deals with her period on race day. Periods are something to celebrate, as put eloquently by pro triathlete Emma Pallant, who we will be hearing from later on. But if you are a woman in your reproductive years, then having a period is a sign that your body is healthy. However, I am sure I'm not alone in admitting that there are certain scenarios when you just wish it wasn't your period that day. Whether you suffer from cramps or bowel issues, lack of energy, or it's simply the inconvenience of having to manage your bleeding, I think it's fair to say that having your period on race day is far from preferable. However, unless you are on the hormonal pill, you've got very little control as to when your period lands. Therefore, it's probably wise that we concentrate on the aspects that we can control. Well, we should probably start by looking at biology. In order to help us understand how to treat and manage our symptoms, it's probably a good idea we know a little bit of what is going on. I'm not giving you a science lesson here, but basically the day your period starts is day 1 of a new cycle, and this is known as the early follicular phase. And you may experience symptoms such as uterine cramps, headaches, breast tenderness, stomach ache, generally lower back pain. There's quite a long list, but on the whole, most of these symptoms will dramatically drop off after day 1. However, I didn't know this, your immunity tends to be a little bit higher at this point in your monthly cycle, yet your muscle recovery from training is a little bit lower. Well, with all of those potential symptoms, I think we should address pain management. We're going to look at flow and energy levels in a moment, but first, if you are suffering from pain or discomfort to do with your period, I imagine that is going to be top of your priority list to solving. Now, hopefully, outside of sport, you've found ways to deal and manage the pain, but there's actually some evidence that over-the-counter anti-inflammatories can benefit you as an athlete, and the benefits can be twofold, because obviously they can help reduce the pain itself, but then they can allow you to do some sort of training, and there's quite a lot of evidence to show that doing light movement and aerobic exercise can reduce the pain. So if you can work out how to fit this into your training, whether that's including some yoga or a recovery swim session or anything else that's light and involving movement, you'll still get some training benefit as well as actually helping to ease and lower the pain symptoms. And your diet is another area worth giving some attention to, as alcohol, caffeine, processed foods, and in some cases dairy products can actually all exacerbate your symptoms at this time. So if you know that you're susceptible to being aggravated by any of those, it's worth avoiding or at least reducing in the help to manage those symptoms. Plus, it's worth noting that your body needs plenty of energy at this time, so try to make sure you include plenty of slow-releasing carbohydrates to keep those energy levels nice and stable. One of the biggest questions we get around racing on your period is how to manage flow. But before we go into the actual details, I think now is a good time to bring in pro triathlete Emma Pallant, whose Instagram post recently went viral. She finished 4th at the PTO European Open. There was a picture of her racing and you could see that she was on her period, and she had a really brilliant response. But anyway, she's here to explain a little bit about that post and how she deals with her period.
So when there was a photo of my period being leaked, and someone suggested that maybe using a different photo that was more flattering of me, my reply back was actually that, yeah, this is the reality of females in sport, and I think it's a good thing for it to be up there because it's what happened. I don't want any photo cropping or editing because, yeah, this is real life. And if we want to be role models, I think, yeah, we have to show our real life in sport, show that you're human, and that kind of encourages the next generation. And yeah, it's part of what we do. So my advice for being able to race in your period is, first of all, train on it, because in training is where you find out, okay, what are my symptoms? How does it affect me? And then you can put proactive ways to deal with those symptoms and train them in before a race day. So for me, for example, I feel like I get quite puffy. I hold a lot of fluid. So I have to make sure that I'm still drinking my electrolytes, because sometimes you feel like, oh, I'm just hungry all the time and I don't feel thirsty. Like I'm so fluidy and I feel heavy. Even though I'm hungry, I don't want to overeat. But if you're drinking and eating well and listening to your body, because you do crave a little bit more calories, then for me, yeah, I kind of just ignore how I look and go by more how I feel and make sure I'm well hydrated going into the race. Also, my quads feel a little bit heavy, and I tend to lower my bike power a little bit, just because, I don't have the same stimulation in my legs. So I would say I conserve a bit more on the bike, and then I get them nice and loose on the run with a nice high tempo and high cadence. And also just alert, like I feel a little bit more foggy. So I make sure I definitely have that coffee in the morning, and before the race start, I've done a really good warm up and I'm fired up, and just, feel like try and get my heart rate's up a little bit more so I'm ready for that start gun.
Emma also explains how she goes about training when on her period. And I find it's quite interesting because there's recently been a lot of research showing that you should adapt your training according to your cycle. But Emma also has a very valid point here.
So with my period, I kind of don't periodize my training around it, just so that I'm going to be ready for if I do have a race day on a heavy day that I know, okay, this is how it affects my training, so I can put that into racing, and then I know my numbers, because my numbers are slightly different, especially on the bike. I kind of have to bike a little bit lower power, and then try and kind of run my legs light. So my flow around training, we don't change anything a lot, because we can't, like if a big race, for example the World Champs, I can't move the date of that. So I kind of use that to entrain my good habits of how to deal with a heavy period training and racing hard. I keep doing that in training.
Now, Emma admits that she uses tampons on race day, but sometimes if it's day one, for example, they aren't purely going to cut it. But you've also got the option of menstrual cups when racing. Beyond that, there isn't that many options. If you're doing a very long race or you've got very heavy flow, then you might want to factor in being able to stop and actually change whether you're carrying some spares with you or you have it in your special needs bag or something. So this will very much depend on individual needs. Bit of an experiment for you to work around. Outside of racing, you've got a few more options such as period pants or sanitary pads as well. And I've heard that actually period pants can last all day and are really great for athletes training. Obviously not quite so great on the bike. You might need to look at other solutions for that, but for running, they could tick the boxes for you. Now, let's look at race day itself. This is an area where you really want to plan ahead because you've got enough anxiety. You don't want to add period anxiety into the mix. But on that note, the stress of a big race coming up can actually affect when your period falls. So you need to be prepared that it might come early, it might come late, and just be ready in case it does change, because there's nothing worse than being caught by surprise. And on that note, you want to make sure you allow plenty of time before your race to make sure you insert or put in place whatever it is you're going to use. So you don't want to be rushing doing that because you want to make sure that you're properly comfortable. So check out where the on-site bathrooms are. Plus, it's a good idea to have a bit of an idea of where the loos might be actually on the course during the race. And if you're using tampons and you expect you'll need to change during your race or at least have a backup, then it's worth popping a couple in a sealable plastic bag. Make sure it's waterproof, and then you can either have it in your tri-suit pocket or put it in your bike for that section. You can opt to put them into special needs in some races when there's bags that you can collect on course, but I would use that as a backup rather than an essential, and then you've got something on you as far safer option. And it's also a good idea to have, in some situations, a sanitary waste bag, because sometimes there's nowhere to dispose of it, so you can wrap it up and take your litter home with you, because it's still all about not littering. So kind of treat it like a gel that you put it in your pocket and you bring the wrapper back until you find a bin. And the final point to talk about is your clothing. If you are worried about any potential embarrassment from leaking, then I'd recommend opting for dark clothing, or at least dark clothing in the crotch area, so that if you do have a little bit of a leak, it won't be that obvious. Now, water can be your friend in racing, obviously, for hydration and keeping you cool, but it's also quite good at washing away a little bit of blood. But just note that sometimes water can make it look a little bit worse when it multiplies. But just be aware, if you're wearing something dark, you're probably not even going to notice. And everyone has got all sorts of their own issues going on race day. They're not going to be noticing what you're doing. It'll feel far worse for you. Well, hopefully these tips have been helpful, and most importantly, Emma's. But like Emma said, a period is something to embrace, and it means you are healthy and ready to race. So with a few tweaks, hopefully you can have a brilliant race day and your training shouldn't be too affected either. If you guys have any interesting experiences challenges or tips that you want to share with me and with the rest of our female viewers, and obviously coaches, partners, and everybody involved, then we would love to hear those. I think it's a conversation that's just really healthy to have. So please leave those in the comments section below. And I really hope you've enjoyed this. If so, give it a like and feel free to share it amongst your female friends.